Hello, welcome to LBW Educate You. We are so glad that you are with us for our first episode of the new year. Happy New Year to all of you. My name is Tamara with Love in a Big World, and we are delighted to be talking today with Erica Battle. Erica, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. First episode of the new year. Thank you.
You are so welcome. We're glad you're with us. Would you please give everybody a little bit more about your background, Erica, and what got you involved in education?
Sure. So I am actually a second career educator. Did not plan on being in education at all. I started my career as a substitute teacher and discovered at the end of that school year, discovered my love for education. And I have been here ever since 2006. During my career, I have had the opportunity to, of course, be a classroom teacher. I was an instructional coach, and now I am a full-time educational consultant since 2017. And what I do now is I work with schools and school districts and to help them with their instructional practices, whether it focuses on authentic relationships with students, high instructional classroom practices, SEL, whatever schools may need. So now I have the opportunity to work with schools and teachers directly.
Wonderful. Well, I'm excited to dig into our conversation today. Tell us a little bit, how did your personal experience as a student fuel your passion for the students that you work with now?
So it's funny. My personal experience in education was one of the reasons why I did not want to be an educator. And I guess we'll get to that. And so what happened, when I became a substitute teacher, I really was substitute teaching just because of circumstance, because I needed to make money after being laid off from a job. But what really happened was I encountered a group of students who needed to know that the teachers that saw them every day cared and believed in them. Right. And what that made me realize was as I continued in education, it made me realize that was my void as a student when I was in the classroom. When I was in the seventh grade, my parents divorced, and it really was a traumatic experience for me. And we know that trauma manifests this way, in different ways. It manifests in different ways in different people. And one of the ways that it manifested in me was I was not engaged in school as I had been up until my end of the seventh grade, the beginning of the eighth grade. I stopped doing my work. My attitude changed. And as I look back at it, instead of any of my teachers trying to figure out what happened from one year to the next, they really just dismissed my attitude and me not being engaged as in the learning as a phase of, being a teenage girl. And I wanted to make sure when I became a teacher that I looked past the behavior and tried to get to the root of the issue and really form those authentic relationships. So everything that I did as an educator, even now as a consultant, is rooted in relationships.
So tell us more about that. What do authentic relationships look like, and how do they fuel student success?
Well, first of all, an authentic relationship takes time to form. And, a lot of times when I talk to teachers and they tell me what they did the first couple of weeks that didn't work, I have to remind them it takes a little bit longer than 2 weeks to form a relationship with someone you don't know, right? And so a relationship is something to me, especially when it's authentic, and especially when it comes to students, is I don't necessarily have to take all of my students home, but an authentic relationship is built with mutual respect, mutual trust, and a mutual understanding. And that relationship with my students, every one of them may not necessarily be my favorite student of all times. I had a couple of students that I trusted enough to send to my classroom to say, hey, go to my closet, look in my purse, bring me A, B, and C, and I could totally trust them, right? But then the rest of my students, I still had a relationship with them where my students could trust that if something was really going on with them, they knew they could come to me regardless, and I would take care of it, no matter what it was, whether it was personal or something going on in school. My students understood that I had a genuine interest in their success, but it wasn't something that I developed with them, the first couple of days of school. It was a relationship that was demonstrated by the actions that I took, and the respect that I showed my students, but also the respect that I actually made a requirement of my students with me. I wanted to respect them, but they also understood that that is a mutual thing. They can't be disrespectful to me and then want me to respect them. But as a teacher, I also can't be disrespectful to them and want them to respect me, right? Just because I'm the adult, that doesn't give me the leeway to treat them any way that I want to treat them. So, relationships are so important to me. Like, I could go on and on about the importance of relationships and how that relationship will really fuel student success, because students will tell me all the time, Miss Battle, I did your homework. I would ask them, you wrote my paper last night? Because, I was always in school. And they'll be like, what? I said, well, if you didn't write this 10-page paper, I have to. No, you did your homework, but I appreciate you doing it to be prepared for class,
That's great. I really appreciate this idea of mutuality between student and teacher. Yeah. When you talk about mutual respect and mutual trust and mutual understanding, what do you think are some of the barriers that teachers have about creating that type of mutual relationship with their students? What are some of the things that you hear from the teachers and students that you're working with?
Assumptions.
Tell us more about that.
And I can't go any further other than teachers assuming they know what their students like, and that they know how their students feel, and assuming that they know why kids are acting the way that they're acting. And so, in fact, I was doing a session yesterday, and the focus actually was SEL. We were talking about SEL. And so one of the things that I had to stress was, we have to stop assuming that bad behavior is personal, which means we have to stop assuming that when a student lashes out, it's something that the teacher has done. We have to stop making that assumption. Instead, we need to go a little bit deeper, because the behavior is rooted in something, and it's manifesting because of a reason that we have no idea about. But it's hard for us to get to the root of the problem when we make assumptions about the students that we encounter every day.
So I think you're spot on. And I love that. I'm just wondering, how do you help teachers let go of those assumptions? Because I think I've heard similar things from the teachers that I work with. Whether it's an assumption about the bad behavior, or whether it's the assumption about a particular type of student or group of students, or gender of student, or race of student. I mean, like, there are a lot of unconscious bias that people carry. So as you're working with folks, how do you help them drop those assumptions?
So one of the things is, I ask teachers to identify their triggers, right? And I know this is like, okay, wait a minute, what does triggers got to do with assumptions, right? And so I ask teachers, okay, identify your triggers. What are some things that, if it happened to you, would send you off on the deep end, right? And so one of my, I could be, and I did this because I had to identify my own personal trigger. And once I identified my triggers, it allowed me to handle situations with my students completely different. right? So one of the things that I know that as Erica Battle does not like is to be yelled at or approached in an aggressive manner. And I'm about to circle back to what you just asked me. And because I know this, when a student had any type of behavior, like if I asked them to do something very simple and it just sent them off on the deep end, I knew something happened that didn't have anything to do with me, but I knew that I couldn't get to the root of what was really going on if I stayed in that environment that triggered me as the adult. Because what happens is when I'm triggered, it becomes a power struggle because now I want my point across. So I simply would remove myself and tell the student, because I was a middle school teacher, right? So they clearly understood what I meant. I would let them know I'm walking off and I need you to calm down. And as soon as you get calm, we can talk about whatever it is going on. Because what I just asked you wasn't really much of anything. So something else is going on, but I need to walk away right now. And so I would come back and me and the student can have an open conversation, and something may have happened either yesterday or right before they got to school or in the hallway. Something happened in between the time that they were away from me and by the time they got to me, and I was the next person and they exploded on me. Right. And so one of the things that I ask teachers to do is, one, identify your trigger and what creates a barrier. Also, identify what are the assumptions that you have about the students that you encounter every day, especially if they're from a different demographic. So, and there is a lot of unconscious biases that teachers have that they don't even realize they have until it's brought to their attention. But what happens is, because I have a bias, and then when I'm triggered, all of those things do nothing but create a cycle of power struggle. And I have now created a barrier as to why I can't get along with the students that I teach every day.
That's so good.
I hope that was a good.
No, I'm sitting here thinking of conversations that I've had with other administrators and teachers as well. And I think one of the things that's come to light for me over the past couple years is the need not only for student SEL, but for teacher SEL. It's just as important. And so when you're describing the importance of identifying triggers, that's part of teacher SEL. The social and emotional learning, the mental health of our teachers, and how can we empower them to say, look, you've got to take care of yourself. Part of taking care of yourself is identifying your triggers. And when you're in that heightened situation, walk away, instead of letting that power struggle happen. And one of the things that I'm constantly reminded of, I'm an educator as well as a mom, and as I know you are, Erica. And I remember years ago when my kids were younger, somebody encouraged me with these words. He said, especially for kids who've been through trauma, you need to remember that they are looking to you as the adult. We all have to be reminded of that sometimes, I think, and that you are that safe place. And so when that power struggle starts to happen, tell yourself, and you're starting to feel that anxiety of it, you're getting triggered. He said, tell yourself, I am bigger, I am stronger, I am wiser, and I am kind. And let that be your mantra. I have used that over and over and over in so many situations. And it's amazing that when I remind myself, I don't need to engage in a power struggle with this child.
Right.
Because I'm the adult. And I can give myself the space to walk away if necessary, and then come back to address what's actually happening in the heart of the child. It changes everything.
Yeah.
And it's like you deflate the situation instead of escalating the situation. And I think that's just a microcosm of what we're seeing happening in our world today. So I'm wondering, we've got a lot going on. I mean, we're in a pandemic. We just had this bombing here in Nashville. We're still doing remote learning in many instances. We had the Capitol riot last week. So, in this idea of mutuality and authentic relationship, how are you encouraging teachers and students and communities to talk about the events that we're facing? Because it's part of being the whole child, right? It's a part of
It
the
is. It is. And, interestingly enough, I did not mention the political climate that we're in now, because it's not that we're still in that climate, and we'll probably be there for a while, right? And I didn't mention that, but I did talk about the isolation that the pandemic has caused. I did talk about just the traumatic experiences that some of our students have experienced because of the pandemic. We've had millions of adults lose their job, right? And so in turn, when you have kids old enough to work, kids have now become household providers in a sense. You have food scarcity. You have people that are dying because of the actual pandemic that we're in. So we do have all of these things that are going on. And one of the things, I had saw this on Facebook, I think, and it really hit me hard. It was a quote that said, kids that are raised in an environment of love survive. Kids that are raised in an environment of love act totally different than kids that are raised in an environment of survivor mode.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to think about that, and I was like, wow.
Mm-hmm.
And so I brought that quote to my teachers, and I said, I want you to think about kids who, in spite of the pandemic, really don't have anything to worry about. Things are pretty much going on as the same, with the exception of not being to socialize as normal. But, they're not in fear of losing food or any of those things. They've experienced really few things have really disrupted their life, versus kids who have really been affected and now they're operating in survivor mode. How heightened is their anxiety, right? How much more grace do they need? The grace has been my word. But then I even talk to teachers to think about the grace that they have to give themselves trying to operate normally in a pandemic as an educator, because there's nothing normal about this year. Nothing, not even with what I do as an educational consultant. I've still been able to do the consult work, but I'm a relational person and I love to be face to face. I love to be where I can touch people and laugh. And this is how I've been operating since March, seriously. It took me a minute to get used to it, and I had to be transparent of how traumatic my work ended abruptly, and I had to digest and process that, but then understand, what do I need to get on the other side of this? What skills do I need? What kind of strategies do I need to put in place for myself? And, I was sharing with you that one of the things that I have started doing is getting up, getting dressed, putting on my Bath and Body Works lotion, my perfumes, putting on some makeup, and wearing my clothes around the house, because it makes me feel so much better. Even if I'm just going to the mailbox, I'm real cute, going to the mailbox.
Mm-hmm.
It gives me a different sense, right? I feel so much better. And so, I have to remind teachers that, not only do they need to give their students some grace, because they may not know exactly what the students are going through, that they need to also have permission to give themselves some grace and understand that this is not a normal time for them. And I think once they digest that, hey, I can give myself some grace, it allows them and eases the anxiety of giving their students grace in the process.
That's great. There's such wisdom there, Erica. And I'm wondering, as you're talking about the teachers and giving themselves grace and the need to give their students grace, what are some ways that, I mean, we're living in a remote world, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not with you. You're not with me, but we're together in this shared time and space. That can be really difficult for kids, even though they live on their devices. This whole idea of learning in a remote space is different. And there's not the same connection with their teachers or with their fellow students. So, what are some tips that you're sharing with the teachers that you're working with that they can use to build that authentic relationship with their kids, even in spite of distance learning?
Well, one of the things that I would say is still carve out time in your day to get to know your students.
Mhm.
So right before Christmas, I was doing some classroom visits, and I had told the teachers that I was coming and said, please just run your classroom as normal. Do not do anything special because I'm visiting. I'll be off camera on mute anyway, so just run your class as normal. And one of the things that this teacher did was for about 7 minutes, they just talked. What did you do this weekend? And the kids were sharing about, this was right around Christmas, and was like, well, we just decided to put our Christmas tree up. And then, the teacher, of course, inquired a little more. Well, what color is the tree? And was there a significance to the color? And these were middle school students. And one of the students was like, well, no, all the decorations were gone. So we didn't have a choice but to pick the colors of our tree because the shells were bare. And I was cracking up because I had went the very first weekend in December, the December 3rd, to go get decorations for my tree, and there were no decorations in Target. Like,
That's funny.
I mean, seriously, I was like, there is nothing here. There were no lights. It was hilarious. And so the person in Target was like, well, yeah, I mean, as soon as we put them out, it was like people needed some joy. So they started cleaning the shelves. So I was laughing because I was like, I can totally relate to this student, right? And then she just allowed, students the opportunity to just talk about what they did over the weekend and just be kids. It wasn't like, let's immediately go into work. No, it was, hey, what did y'all do this weekend? Oh, okay. Well, how was that? And, someone else has celebrated their birthday. And so we have to understand that even though we're in a digital world, we still need to find a way to find some kind of connection, and carving out time just for kids to have, conversation that they would normally have if they saw each other in the hallway I
Right.
think it's okay. Like, I don't think we need to get caught up on, okay, we're on the computer, we got to get going. No, what would you do normally to cultivate relationships in your classroom? And I know it's not as easy as we would. I know of another teacher who, at one point, the kids were just talking about how they missed everyone. And she set up a Zoom lunch. Well, let's eat lunch together. And everybody just brought their lunch and they just sat on Zoom, eating lunch, playing music.
Mm.
Right? It's, we wasn't together, but the kids still had the opportunity to have some just downtime with their peers. And so, do we have to be creative? Yes, we do. But it did the kids so much good just to relax, eat lunch. They were listening to music. The teacher said they were talking about, the latest songs and streams. A couple of people shared some TikToks. So, just finding time for kids to be normal, even though they can't be in their normal environment, is always welcome.
That's great. And I love that idea of letting them share their music and
Mm-hmm.
shows, their TikToks. That's their world. And we have to give space for that. I love that.
Yeah, yeah.
So, in this whole idea of creating authentic relationships and making sure we're connecting with our kids, how do you see that relating to the needs of the whole child? Because I think more than ever, we as educators are recognizing the significance of addressing the needs of the whole child. I mean, I'll give you some context. I started in education in 96.
Mm-hmm.
So at that time, we talked about the whole child. And then we went through No Child Left Behind, and everything became about standardized testing. And so now it really seems like the pendulum is swinging. And I hate to say it on one hand, but I think it's the truth. This pandemic has brought to light the needs of kids, not just academically, but physically, emotionally,
Mhm.
mentally, socially, in a way that I think we forgot for a long time.
Yeah. I have to agree with you on that. I do. I have to agree. One of a statistic that was alarming that no one had ever that I mean, I know people were paying attention to, but I think as educators, it wasn't a statistic that we really kind of took into account was the suicide rate in the age and how the suicide rate had increased 70% between I want to say kids ages 10 to 19 that the
Yes.
suicide rate since 2012 had increased by 70%. And I tell teachers, now this was the rate before the pandemic. I said I would love to see a recalibrated rate since the pandemic, right? Because I know of someone who of a suicide that was recent and during the pandemic, young and some a young guy that fell in that age range, right? And I think that what this pandemic has brought to light is we, as the educators, began to understand that we need to focus on our own personal self care and our own mental health issues and making sure we were in a good place. That we began to realize, like, wait, if we're not in a good place and we're the educators and we're normally equipped with these skills and these strategies on how to cope and get through, what about the kids? Right? Um, and then the kids started expressing their struggles and how the isolation began to really affect them. And, parents of teens are like, listen, my child, they're reclusive. Now they're just in their room. They don't want to come out. I can tell they're going through a state of depression. And it helped us see that, hey, wait a minute. It's not all about content. It's not all about content. And when I'm doing my talks, I bring up the statistic where John Hattie, the educational researcher, when he's done research on 256 visible learning strategies, and one of the things that he measured and did research on was the impact of student-teacher relationship and how does it impact learning versus the impact of teacher content knowledge. And what he found out was that teacher content knowledge did not have a positive effect on students' academic achievement, whereas the teacher-student relationship had a positive effect. And so, even though kids will learn from people they don't like, in the words of the late Rita Pearson, kids don't learn from people they don't like.
No, they don't.
They don't. They turn you off. They disengage. They become defiant and maybe a little oppositional, right? Because there's no relationship there. And so when we talk about the whole child, we're not just dealing with them academically. We're helping them cope with social situations. We're helping them develop a sense of independence, sense of self-awareness. We're helping them go through the process of manage. So, we look at the 5 competencies of CASTLE, and as it relates to SEL, if I don't have a relationship with you, it's going to be hard for you to listen to me when I want to talk to you about responsible decision making. It's kind of like, I don't even like you. Why would I listen to you? How do I know you even have my best interest at hand when you're having this conversation? And so when we talk about understanding the whole child, it's not just making sure that they're successful academically, it's making sure that we can equip them with life skills that not only will they use when they're with us, but we're equipping them with those life skills that will be valuable to them even when they have left us for years upon, years on end.
Mm-hmm.
So,
That's so true. And I'm thinking about the fact that, looking back on my educational career, not just as a teacher, but as a student, there's so much that I forgot. that I learned in a book, but it was the interactions that I had with my teachers and with my peers that I carried with me.
Mm-hmm.
It was also my teachers, to your point about life skills, my teachers teaching me how to think critically, how to find information, how to analyze information, how to communicate my own thinking. I mean, those were the skills that I was able to carry with me. And especially now that we live in the world of Google, I mean, kids can Google anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's how can they assimilate all this different information in order to create something new.
Yeah.
So I think that in a lot of ways, education is not yet caught up with where we are because of the technological changes. And when I'm talking to employers, they're saying the deficit is not the informational knowledge, it's their people skills that are lacking. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to your point, this is what we have to focus on.
Yeah. I think about the other day I went to McDonald's, right? And did my order. And after I did my order, I was like, oh, okay, thank you. And the guy at the speaker was like, you're welcome. So when I went to the window and gave the young lady my money and she handed it back, I was like, oh, thank you. She didn't say you're welcome, right? I just found that interesting. I got to the window to receive my food. I mean, just normally, I was just taught to say thank you. I was like, thank you. She shut the window, like I was not even there, and it takes me. And she didn't acknowledge my thank you at all, and I just kind of giggled because one of the things when I was a teacher. I was, and I remember my last couple of years in the classroom, my kids would line up outside the door if I was not there, and they just, didn't have permission just to be in my classroom when I wasn't there. So as they would come in, I would greet them all, hey, good morning, good morning, good morning. And if a student would keep going and not acknowledge my good morning, I would stop them and I would say, I said good morning. And they would be like, oh, good morning. And I would have that conversation with them. If I tell you good morning, if I'm saying good morning, I'm acknowledging you. I need you to acknowledge my good morning. And I don't think anything was wrong with that, right? Because that's a skill that needs to be taught. If you hand me in a piece of paper and I say thank you, I need you to acknowledge me by saying you're welcome. Right. I said, because that's me being polite. I said, what if I just took things to you and didn't acknowledge you at all? How would you feel?
Mm-hmm.
And they would have to really think about it because that wasn't a skill that necessarily anyone stopped and made them think about, like, wow, okay, someone acknowledging me. And it wasn't done in a malicious way. It was just to bring it to their attention. When someone is acknowledging you, acknowledge the person that is acknowledging you. I was like, that's just common courtesy. So if I'm saying good morning, all right, have a great day, see you later, tell me bye. Don't just walk away like I was talking to the air. I was that teacher that's just like, listen, we need to have a conversation. So, those are skills that kids are not necessarily taught. I even teach my own kids, if I give you something, tell me thank you. I know I'm your mom and I'm gonna do it because I'm your mom, but still acknowledge it, So
Well, it goes back to what we started with at the beginning. It's about mutual respect, mutual trust, mutual understanding. And I think in many ways, it's acknowledging our humanity with one another.
yeah. Oh, that's
And
good.
not just saying like you're just somebody who's taken up space, but no, like we share this common brotherhood, this common sisterhood, and we need to acknowledge one another in just the basic ways that, I mean, there might be a lot of things we disagree on, but there's so many things that we can agree on.
Yeah.
And saying thank you, good morning, giving a smile. I mean, it's
Just simple things. And these are simple things.
not hard.
Right.
It's just not hard.
Right.
You know,
Simple.
I've been thinking a lot this past week, Erica, before we wrap up. I've been thinking a lot about going back to the basics.
Mm-hmm.
After watching what we saw last week at the Capitol, I'm just like, we have to go back to what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah.
Plain and simple.
Yeah.
What is right is acknowledging that another person exists as a human being
Yeah.
and giving them respect, whether that's opening a door for them or saying hello. What is right is being honest and returning the proper change if you're the cashier at McDonald's. It's just, this is right and wrong, good and
Yeah.
bad. It's not that hard.
It's not.
It's the
And
things
it's
that
okay to think different.
Right.
It's okay. It's okay. Can we agree to disagree? I always say, I know I have a good friend in someone if I can say respectfully, we're going to have to agree to disagree on this one. I love you dearly, but I just don't agree with that opinion. And
Right.
it's okay if me and my friends don't agree all the time, but it's not okay if that disagreement causes us to break a relationship, right? Can we disagree but still maintain our friendship? Well, let me give a disclaimer to that. Especially, we gotta, as long as we're not disagreeing on things that are just morally wrong. Let's just be clear. Morally wrong, but having basic disagreements should not kill a friendship. And I think we have gotten to a place where the internet has made it okay for us to think that our opinion is the opinion that should stand. And when someone disagrees with our opinion, oh, okay, we can't be in the same circle. Whereas, right. When can we go back to having a dialect, well, conversation, dialogue is what I meant. Where we can all share our opinions, and it not ruin relationships.